Hello, everyone. Oops, is this on? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Fran Burwell with the Atlantic Council. I'd like to welcome you to the last panel of the first day of the Wroclaw Global Forum. This session, which is on competitiveness in a challenging global economy, is on the record and live webcasted at wroclawglobalforum.com. We are also going to try to do one of our Twitter polls for this one. So using the hashtag WGF16, we are going to ask you, or run a poll, what is the most economically competitive country in the world? And the choices are the USA, Sweden, Switzerland, and Singapore. And in 24 hours, you can go online to, you can go to the to Twitter, to the hashtag, and you can vote. And in 24 hours, we will put the results up on our website. And we'll see how close you are to reality. So far today, we've been looking at the security challenges facing Poland, Europe, and the transatlantic partnership. But with this panel, we're now going to delve into the economic elements of the relationship, and particularly the question of how the US and Europe can maintain their economic prosperity and competitiveness in what is a very challenging and changing global economy. There's no doubt that within our societies today, there is much concern about our economies, both now and in the future. You have only to listen to the US presidential election to know that our voters see the economy as the biggest challenge and the biggest problem facing the United States, and expect that it will be the top priority for the next president. Today, 55% of Americans think their children will be worse off economically when they're grown. And moreover, barely 30% of Americans think that the economy is fair. In fact, 65% say that the economic system favors powerful interests. And it's not just a perception. The United States now ranks 30th percentile in income equality. That is, 70% of countries are more equal. In Europe, the challenge is one of persistent low growth, a different thing. EU economic growth is now expected to be 1.8% in 2016. This follows modest growth of about 2% or less since the Eurozone crisis. Even 10 years before the crisis, growth rates were low. Poland is actually unusual in that the growth rate has slowed from 5% in 2011, and it slowed down at one point to 1.5%, but now the forecast is looking pretty good. But across Europe, there is a very active discussion on the need for economic reform, and we've seen in France today how volatile and lively that discussion can be. But overall, most Europeans do believe, in fact, 78% agree that there is a need for economic reform. The problem is, how do you do that? Only 27% believe that the retirement age should be increased in order to sustain pensions. So there you have the dilemma. This discussion of US and European economies and their challenges cannot take place in a vacuum. The US and Europe continue to be leaders in the global economy, but they're also a shrinking part of that economy. Depending upon how you measure it, the EU is 24% of global GDP, while the US is 22%. And both of those figures are in a slow decline. So we have a choice. Let things continue as they are and see a slow erosion of our position in the global economy, or to find ways to boost our competitiveness and to make our economies stronger in this environment. But we have the question of what does it mean to be competitive and how do you get there? And we have a fabulous panel with, I think, an outstanding mix of economic analysts, policymakers, and business people to consider this option. We have Anders Åslund, one of the top economic analysts of European economies and a good colleague of mine at the Atlantic Council, who has also not just written and analyzed about economies, but advised numerous governments. Jan Krzysztof Bielecki, not only a former prime minister here, but also someone who has had the lead on economic policy as chair of the Council of Economic Advisors and head of the EBRD. Marietta Schaake, a member of the European Parliament, where she's been prominent on key issues on transatlantic economic relations, as well as looking at competitiveness in the European thing. She and I have done a lot of work on TTIP and digital issues, and it's great to have her here in Poland for the first time at Wrocław. Lee Feinstein, whom I think most of you know or know of, former U.S. ambassador to Poland, dean now at a major U.S. university, and advised many companies on economic opportunities. Maciej Wituski, who brings a tremendous business experience as a former CEO of Orange and now CEO of WorkService. So greetings to you all. I am going to start with Anders, and I want to ask you, Anders, how do you define economic competitiveness? What do you look at as the elements of it? And then when you look at Europe, and maybe to some extent the United States, what needs to happen for us to be able to say that Europe is competitive in the global economy now?
Yeah. Thank you, Fran, and thank you very much for the invitation to speak here today. Let me start with this. I just spent 3 days in Brussels. Nothing works. There are strikes everywhere. You never know when or for what reason. Big demonstrations. And what this reminded me of, it was when I was a student at Oxford during the winter of discontent, 78 to 79. So one is just waiting. Where is Mrs. Thatcher when we really need her? This is the situation in Europe. So to your question, what is wrong with the European economy? I won't put it in terms of competitiveness, but what has failed? GDP in purchasing power parity per capita in the old EU, the EU 15, is 20% below the US level. And it has been like that for a long time. We are seeing no convergence whatsoever. On the contrary, the European Union is now cheering that it's coming back to the 2008 level. This is 7 or 8 lost years. And you would then expect that Europe should be dying to fight for economic growth. And not at all. 10% unemployment, who cares? What is this? The European Union has wasted 5 years on discussing what to do about Greece. What you do in a crisis is that you solve it fast. The 3 Baltic countries, we have Prime Minister Kubilius here, did that quickly and smoothly in 2009. Just before, we had Natalia Jaresko, who did the same in Ukraine under very difficult circumstances. Europe is simply too comfortable. It's got used to the stagnation. So what should be done? Well, a clear agenda needs to be set about what is wrong. And this is no hard ideological stuff. It's common sense. Europe spends too much money, public money. The fiscal burden is too big on the state. And this money goes to the wrong purposes. If you just cut out what the state should not do, various enterprise subsidies, for example, you would get down to normal level, which is actually the case in most of Eastern Europe within the European Union. So for all questions, we see that there are countries in the European Union that do the right thing. And then, if you have more fiscal space, what should you do? Stimulate? Well, we have seen that film. We have seen that Europe now has 87% of GDP in public debt on average. And has that helped? No. So we have proven that fiscal stimulus is not good. We should try something that the rest of the world that manages to grow does instead: cut taxes on labor. Capital can't be taxed in the globalized world, so instead the workers suffer, mainly through payroll taxes, but also through income taxes. And then you will also cut unemployment and get it down from 10 to 5%. Britain, Ireland, Germany, and Denmark have by various means managed to get unemployment down to that level. That's where the other countries should go also. Then pension reform. My favorite pension reform is in Holland, where the pension system is perfectly balanced between public and private sectors, and the public pension expenditure below 7% of GDP, But we have other countries like Greece, even today, and Italy, that are over 14% of GDP. It's twice as much as it should be. Pension reform has to proceed. And we have two big markets that are just missing, digital and service markets. If you have an account for any kind of video access, Netflix, for example, then you have to have one in every country in Europe because you don't have a free market. You can't order from Amazon.com as you want. It's highly restricted. And the same with the service markets. These are the big modern markets, and Europe has only a single market when it comes to manufactured goods. And what is most difficult to promote, it is innovation, high tech. This is where Europe is really lagging behind, and this is, of course, what's important for the future. Google, Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, they're all young American companies that did not exist 20 years ago, not to mention Uber, the most dangerous one today. If you say that new technology is illegal, then you can't win. And finally, what is really missing, it is higher education. If you take the 50 best universities according to the Shanghai list of the Times Higher Education list, 30 are in the US, 6 or 7 in Britain, only 4 on the EU continent. This is the biggest shortcoming, and there Europe can only learn from Britain in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Anders. Mr. Bielacki, how does this sound from a Polish perspective? It seems to me you face a couple of challenges. First off, can Poland keep its own growth rate up if Europe doesn't start growing? But I also sometimes feel that this discussion that Anders was just talking about is somewhat different here in Poland, that here in Poland there are different focuses on of the economy, whether it's state-owned companies and their role in the economy. What does Poland need in order to continue to be a relatively high growth and competitive economy?
Thank you for the questions, and thank you for the invitation to Wrocław Forum 2016. It's always a pleasure to be here in Wrocław. I will use Andres' matrix, which he used to analyze the situation in Europe, and I will follow to his criteria, one after one, and try to produce kind of my own assessment of how those criteria fit to the Polish situation. So Andres started with too much public money. I think in the Polish case is not an issue. With 42% of GDP, redistribution is not that much. So it's not our problem. Taxation, tax burden, also I think it's today even lower than in the UK, which was kind of a peer group for me. So I think that the Polish business has to recognize that taxation is rather low in Poland than even a medium size. So taxation is conducive for business and encouraging business to go forward. Debt burden, the third criterion by Andrej, also is not an issue. Not only that the debt level is included in the Polish constitution, which imposed the limit, 60%, but also that each government is very much aware of the risks related to the unlimited debt increase. So that is under control, today is in the range of 50%. So in European terms, where the average is more than 90%, it's okay. Unemployment, surprisingly improving. According to the EU indicators, it's now even below 9%, but it's very diversified. In agglomerations, we don't have unemployment at all. In the agglomeration like Wroclaw, like Poznań, like Warsaw, like Gdańsk, the problem is just the opposite. It's a hunt for the employees. In Poznań, with the unemployment rate 2.5%, they now have to commute up to 50, 60 kilometers, employees, to some modern plants, for example, built by Volkswagen recently and opened. So they have to pay much more, but still they have to commute because they can't find the locals at that wage level, which is good because the wages were not high in Poland, so it's pushing the wage level forward through the market forces, not through any administrative measures. Pension reform, okay, I have some argument with Andrzej on this issue, but to stay on a friendly basis, I will say yes, part of Polish pension reform was very good, and the second part was not that good. And I will stop. Now, unfortunately, some less simple and pleasant issues. Innovations, robotics, this in my new capacity as the chairman of the board of partners of UI, I have to listen about it every day. When we travel to the US, robotics, not even innovation, but robotics, digitalization. Yes, he didn't mention digitalization that clearly, but digitalization is a buzzword, so everything has to be digitalized. And this is a big challenge for us. I think there are some interesting signs that the digitalization is moving. At the administration level, is not. And this is a serious problem. When we look at the healthcare, at some typical administrative operations, the level of digitalization is not satisfactory at all, and we have to admit it. Now we go even to the more difficult issues, because in my opinion, and this is also good news and bad news, in my opinion, this is the biggest problem for Poland, is a hunt for talent and role of the talent in the future economy. Because Professor mentioned digitalization, robotics, so it's all about high tech, so you need a talent. And unfortunately, what I learned today is that there is an international search for Polish talents. And it's good and bad news. It's good that we have talents, but bad news because, well, I can't mention some professional information, but if they spot a talent, they immediately offer them a job. When the very good guys established a company doing this very now modern possible business, which is blockchain, the company was immediately spotted, was taken over, and the guys were offered a job. But the job and the ownership and being an entrepreneur, there are two different issues. So how to protect the talents but give them enough opportunities in the global world is a big issue. It's a big issue. And then even more the difficult problem mentioned by Andrzej, which are universities. Yes, I agree. Also, I would add on top of universities, business schools. If you look at the ranking, FT ranking of top 100 business schools, the Polish Koźmiński is coming 45. But famous SGH, which for years for decades was a synonym of the best economics in Poland and in the region, comes 80 something. So, and universities is even worse. In top 500, who represents Poland? Well, Jagiellonian University, but in 300 something position. So, reform of the universities and the competition among universities, not common agriculture policy for the universities and subsidies for everybody on an equal basis. This is also a must, which is necessary if we really think about improved competitiveness, how to boost competitiveness. So I can stop right now.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I think it's great to see both our panelists starting to hone in on universities, but I want to go back a little bit to where Anders started, which was with Brussels, because we have a great representative here, Maria Rashaki, and as a member of the European Parliament, you work in the belly of the beast, so to say. Do you think that Europe, and i.e. the EU, is taking steps to boost European competitiveness? How does all this look from that perspective to you? Mm-hmm. And particularly when you look at some of the things that are in, for example, the Juncker plan, but also, I know you've done a lot on digitization and digital issues. Anders pointed to that as a weakness overall in the European economy. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with his overall poor assessment of Brussels?
Well, I'm kind of hoping still that that the reference was to the strikes in Belgium and you know, slow internet maybe. No, I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of the assessment is also true for the EU, where if you look at the plans on paper, there are commitments to investing in a knowledge economy, which is very necessary, taking away money from subsidies, to the digital economy. The digital single market is a widely supported plan. But it still has to be built with much more ambition and higher speed. And the same goes for trade. I think it's interesting that we saw this week that the President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, actually went back to the member states and kind of asked them to renew their vows, to renew their commitment to the mandate to negotiate a transatlantic trade and investment partnership, after the Commission often feels that the blame and the questions are directed at them, but the member states should be doing more. And it would be great if they can renew their commitment, because after all, they are the ones asking the Commission to negotiate, and trade should lead to growth. But I'm, also aware of the high divorce rates these days, and I hope it's not going to affect this discussion. But I think, all the plans to boost growth, to ensure there's more integration, depend on political leadership. And if we look at Europe now, I think there are some serious leadership choices that have to be made that are not being made. I think generally we can see that there is a bit of paralysis on the answer to the question, how do we sustain our quality of life? I think it's a question that a lot of people are experiencing after there has been almost unchallenged growth for the generation since World War II, and in fact peace and the freedoms that we enjoy in Europe have really actually not been questioned anymore. And in the climate of fear that we see, indeed, it's been mentioned in the previous panels, the ghosts from the past are coming back, and I'm afraid that they are here to stay. And I think it leads to several kinds of fragmentation, sometimes very literally, when we look at borders being erected again and Schengen actually being under serious pressure. And I think it's worrying that this discussion about Schengen is only held in the context of migrants and asylum seekers. Well, it has immediate economic impact. And there's not enough leadership on that. The Prime Minister mentioned that there's a need for attracting talent. There is, but of course it goes hand in hand with legal avenues for migration, because the search for talent and the competition for talent is a global one. So it immediately impacts the single market and the economy as well. We see this huge fragmentation in the political landscape where the flanks, which are often identified as left and right, but are essentially more and more one bloc, having a nationalist and even protectionist agenda, where they promise people that their entitlements will not be touched, that fundamental reforms that are very necessary of government spending and pensions, labor markets, housing markets are not going to happen, even though they have to happen. And this kind of false nostalgia, I guess, is very appealing for people when they experience this fear. And it leads to scapegoating of migrants and refugees, obviously a hot topic today, which I think takes very, very dangerous forms that have to be challenged, but also scapegoating of the EU and the elites more broadly. And there's this narrative of a perceived zero-sum game between the so-called national interest and the European interest, which, again, I think is a false dichotomy. And it has huge impact on the ability of leaders to set the agenda on a European level, because nobody's really willing, even in the political middle, to go out and talk about the need for further integration, to strengthen the single market, and to build this digital single market, for example. And I wanted to stress the importance of this mutual dependence and the need for leadership there, particularly because we're in Poland. Because there have been a lot of discussions in the previous panels as well, and very rightfully so, on the importance of solidarity when it comes to defense, looking at the needs of this part of Europe and the real threat and risk of further escalation with Putin's Russia. We have the very prominent question of the extension of sanctions vis-à-vis Russia coming up, and that requires solidarity in Europe. In the Netherlands, we've very immediately experienced the threat from Russia. The shutdown of MH17 was a huge national mourning and disaster, and there is, I think, great appreciation for the geopolitical aspects of it. But there are also farmers that are growing tomatoes, peppers, tulips that are asking me as a politician, why do we need these sanctions? It costs our economy about 1 billion euros a year. And I have to tell them that, it is important that we stand together in Europe and that the rule of law is respected and that those who violate the rule of law will see the consequences of this. And I think in that light, we also need to look at the discussion about this country. EU law is international law. And it's important that we can have that discussion in a mature way, but in a serious way, because how credible are we if we're not holding our own members to account to the commitments that they have themselves made? And I think it's very important to look at that. When people are making the case to stop the free flow of labor in our country, again, it's a very hot topic. People coming from Poland, and even though we are all Europeans, some people see people from Poland coming to work in other European countries as migrants. And so this notion of solidarity should, I think, or this notion of mutual dependence, rather, on different issues, should hopefully, with more political leadership, bring people together. And we have to be very much aware that actually the defense questions, the migration and asylum questions, the competitiveness questions, and the ability to lead in a changing world are all kind of coming together around these key questions. And trade is only one of them, but one where I think this nationalism, protectionism, entitlements, and global perspective all come together in a, fragile, difficult discussion.
Yes, and we've certainly seen that in Germany and Austria when they look at the TTIP discussions. So let me turn now to Lee Feinstein, who was here, of course, in Poland, and when he was ambassador, was responsible as well for helping bring our economies closer together. And so what do you see when you look at the Polish economy and the opportunities and the challenges for people who are thinking about investing? But I also think that what Marietta said about political leadership and competitiveness, perhaps you'd also take an opportunity, because we've focused mostly on Europe right now. And the U.S. is a competitive country, but on the other hand, you might want to say a few words about political leadership in our country as well, if you wish.
Well, you stated that very diplomatically, Fran, so thank you. Yes, and I think I very much agree with the general direction of Marietta's remarks. And I will start with the U.S. perspective, which is to say, as you will have noticed, we have a campaign taking place in the United States. And so, you know, things get said in campaign season that are repeated. And, you know, trade agreements are rarely popular among the public, and they're often contested, and people who are generally tend to be pro international trade and see the benefits to the U.S. economy and to the United States and its security and well-being more broadly tend to de-emphasize those points during the campaign. And I think that's especially the case right now. I think it's a kind of a delayed effect from 2008, and I think paradoxically, in a way, and there's some research to this effect, that in fact, it's as an economy starts to improve after a shock, that the discontent tends to manifest the most. And I think that's what we're experiencing in the United States now. We talk about political leadership. There wasn't a few years ago, and there isn't still now, a general appreciation of the degree to which the U.S. economy is so deeply dependent on its trade relationship with Europe. That goes in both directions, I think, but you know, I was just checking before we met, 80% of global foreign investment into the United States comes from Europe. Many of the places in the United States where the concerns about global trade are expressed with the most intensity are themselves the places that are most dependent on the trade relationship with Europe. So clearly, you know, campaigns are never a good time for discussing foreign policy or economic policy. We understand that, but clearly there's a pressing need to address this issue in the United States. You know, in Poland and more broadly in Central Europe, I think that there's a genuine sense of disappointment that the trade relationship is not greater, and there is definitely room to do more. The Prime Minister and I, a few years ago, had a conversation about the very early investments that some American firms made in Poland at a time when the economic basis for doing so was uncertain, so it was a gamble. But what those companies found, the ones that were successful, is that the kind of early commitment to Poland, which was, you know, principally an economic decision, but also had to do with the kind of solidarity we're talking about, that they've benefited from the early commitment to the economy here and the loyalty that they've shown by staying here, and that's something that the Prime Minister himself has discussed with me personally. And you know, although investments could be greater and ought to be, you know, it's worth pointing out that the asset base in Central Europe, in Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic, from the United States is larger than the U.S. asset base in India, and that may tell you as much about India as it does about Central Europe, but it's nonetheless an important point, and that the manufacturing base that's directly or indirectly a consequence of U.S. investments is large and growing, particularly if you take the cutouts away. I know there are lots of different ways to do one's bookkeeping. I would say that one area of potential growth or maybe disappointment is in energy cooperation. And I would say that There are a variety of reasons for that. Some of them are geological. Some of them have to do with the global price of energy, but also some of it has to do with the regulatory scheme. And I think, and that's on both sides of the Atlantic, certainly here, but also a continuing U.S. policy which has yet to embrace the idea of leveraging restrictions on energy exports to those states with whom we have yet to establish a comprehensive trade agreement. Although I think that the trends in that direction are moving in a better direction. And I guess the final point I would make, which is very much in keeping with what Marietta said, and some of our other panelists, is how deeply tied are the transatlantic economic ties to our security and foreign policy goals, which is to say that our economic competitiveness is an element of our security. You can't just to restate the phrase, security begins at home, and it does. But also, to the degree we'll be able to maintain a strong position vis-a-vis Russia on Ukraine and maintain sanctions, just as Marietta was saying. We need to show the benefits on the other side as well. That includes demonstrating the benefits of TTIP and showing the importance of a strong economic relationship. And then there's the sort of additional point, which is the fragile, economically fragile condition of Ukraine. Does nothing to contribute to its physical security, and that is true to a large extent for all of us. The ability to maintain solidarity again toward Russia at this very difficult time is to a large degree a function of our economic well-being and our willingness to take some difficult steps. And of course, for Europe, the economic sacrifices are by orders of magnitude greater than they are for the United States when it comes to these sanctions. It's really a tremendous diplomatic achievement that we've been able to maintain those sanctions. And I think that they will be, if I didn't vote, but if I had to, I would vote that they would probably stay in place. But it's not automatic, and it requires some leadership.
Right. Thank you very much. Let's turn now to Maciej Wituski, who has to deal with these issues in real life, so to speak, as a businessman. And Maciej, one of the things that has been brought up by our first two panelists actually is human resources. And that's central to the business you're in today. So we're looking at the broader question of competitiveness and how you are finding the operating environment in Poland and more broadly, because work service is actually quite widely dispersed. But what particularly are you finding in terms of mismatch of talent and jobs?
Okay, thank you for this question, for the invitation. So maybe 2-3 remarks concerning the previous statements, and I will come back to your question. So I would say for European competitiveness, what is somehow surprising that when you look on the indexes, I've been looking on the internet, that you have per country, we have quite a good results, even very good results. If you see the most competitive economies, assuming with respect to the Swiss people present in the room, Switzerland in Europe, we are basically in top 10 with only Singapore and the United States. So Finland, Sweden, UK, Germany. So we have per country competitiveness or easiness to do business, and then we do not present the same power as a continent, which is a kind of paradox. Number one, we have some good examples. Germany, obviously, it's the one which everybody uses. And by the way, maybe it's a kind of way for Europe, because we're all looking on the high tech. And we're all dreaming about the Silicon Valley. I don't believe that you may have 20 Silicon Valleys in the world. Some elements, I think for the US, there's an element of the single market. So whenever you invent a Google, you have immediately 300, let's assume that with Canadians and all the areas, we have 300 million people available to test your product. in the same area. If I invent the same Google in Poland, I will have my 36 million Polish speaking more or less Polish, and some immigrants. But that is a real difference. And by the way, in Europe, we are wondering about building a European Facebook. I remember all those European dreams, and we missed the fact that the Google Translate is not European. We should be the first ones to develop Google Translate, because they don't need it. The Americans, they can flow us with and something against Americans, by the way, Mr. Ambassador, but it's just, there's a universal language. And there's a natural specialization of Europe in the digital world which we missed. And by the way, this specialization of translation of our languages, it's a natural kind of element stopping the development of this topic, or slowing down the development of the e-economy. And we may even have all those new European rules about the e-market, e-commerce, but still, when I go on the Hungarian e-shop or Finnish e-shop to select difficult languages for me, it's not because I will have some tax rules behind that I will recognize that this strange word means bread, sugar, or whatever, unless I use the American Google Translate. So maybe we should not have this utopia of going into the new Silicon Valley in Europe. There are other elements which are of differentiation. It's when we speak about competitiveness, and I'm not calling for any monopolies linked with my previous jobs in Orange. But just to look at the market, you have, let's say, 250 million Americans, and let's say 3 mobile operators on the market. In Europe, we have 500 million Europeans, and we have more than 100 mobile operators. So you can imagine the level of financial power of the 3 compared to the financial power for development of new technologies, for development of new ideas, for financing of the new projects. So in the way Americans, there's a big country, but with big competition, but eventually sometimes smarter competition than the one we installed with some areas of the EU economy. So closing the story of the German example, Germany is not necessarily the super trooper e-high-tech, but at the same time the whole world is producing goods on the German machines. And the whole world is using the smartly improved technologies invented. And so we are quite good on the innovation, I would say. We generate the industrial value for the world, but then eventually this industrial value is being used as tools for China, or eventually brains for the US. So, but we are not doomed. Now, what is the difference for the e-economy? Just 2 elements for me. It's obviously access to the financing, but second one is the regulation. And I will give you an example of today's first page of Polish Rzeczpospolita, which is the most read business and daily newspaper, saying to us on the first page, Europe most probably will not attack Uber and Airbnb. So good news for Uber and Airbnb. They already exist worldwide, and this is a question. And I don't want to discuss about the behind. Is it kind of what is the level of the eventual attack? But it shows a mental approach to those new events. I'm not saying that they should not be somehow controlled, but we want to regulate something which already is global. I don't think that we are capable to stop those phenomena, even because of the demand of the consumers. Now, coming back to the question, and what are the needs, what problems we have today. So yes, it's a question of, obviously, a question of education. Yes, it's a question of the universities. But I would say as long as the robots presented by Prime Minister Bielecki are still more visible and will be more visible with George Lucas' Star Wars than in our houses. I'm sorry for my short-term vision, but I still think that when you speak about robots, it's still, again, 10 years, 20 years perspective. Today, we have in Europe and in Poland, I will give you numbers, we have a problem of vocational training. In Poland, we have today like missing 400,000 vocationally trained young people, which do represent something like 1.5% lost GDP growth. And it's just the places are on the market. And when I look from my perspective, providing people to the businesses in Poland and 12 other countries of Europe, means the first demand, it's not about the PhDs, sorry for all the PhDs being here, it's about the blue collars. And I could sell, in Poland, in Germany, I can sell an unlimited number of forklift drivers. Does not sound like 21st century, but it's reality. And because with business, they don't have them, they have issues with the productivity. So yes, higher education. Yes, the global competitiveness. So I think what Europe should do, but it's again, I think it's somehow against the DNA of Europe. It's a selective immigration, the US-Canadian way. But I can hardly imagine European rules saying we will have open borders for PhDs of IT and PhDs of high-tech or nanotechnology. I'm not sure that this is in the DNA, but we should at least try. Then second element is effectively the element of this vocational education, which if we believe in our speeches about reindustrialization, and if we don't believe that the robots will be here next year, it's important to increase the value, especially if we have European economy based very much on the industrial, very much stronger on the industrial values than on the high tech. Now, few threats. First, for me, obviously, is demography, because when you see the numbers, and Germans midterm 10 million positions in the industry, even Poland more than 1 million. So for the time being, we have roughly 1 million Ukrainians coming to Poland, very happy about it, because they do replace what we lost with people going to the West. But let's imagine that tomorrow Germany opens the border for the part-time employers from Ukraine. We will lose 1 million workers in Poland within, I would say, maximum 10 days. It will not be like the Poles we lost within 10 years. It will be 10 days. And it will be absolutely normal, so I still hope not giving good ideas to the German industry, so don't do it. So demography. Then this effectively Europe with this still, I would say Europe, it's not the state, but etatist approach of Europe. So we spoke about different European strategies, so high tech. Who remembers the Lisbon strategy? It was aiming to kill or overcome Facebook and name it. It does not exist anymore. So this is for me. I think that it should be again more about regulating the world of the private business and eventually using or pushing states towards better usage of money, because the European budget is still nothing compared to what is being eventually misused at the national level. Then a big threat, and it was already presented. I was quite shocked being member of the board of Atlantic Council of my last meeting in Washington, when I heard kind of smart, highly educated Americans saying, "Oh, we most probably lost money with the 3 treaty agreements with many countries." I mean, it's the first time in my life I heard that. It was supposed to overcome us and to abuse of us, Europeans. And suddenly I hear that in the US, I have the same statement. So suddenly we all lost on the free treaty agreements. It's worrying, because it will not help the global economy. So I hope that this will somehow pass. And the last element, obviously, which is linked with the employment, is all this social turmoil, which is abused by the politicians. Because if you ask to the kids today, they don't dream about our jobs being a full-time equivalent, if possible, in the same company for 40 years, and so it's not what they dream about. What they think about, okay, give me flexibility, give me decent salary, obviously, but give me some flexibility, give me possibility of the remote working, give me some options for the social security and some options for the pension system. Well, they don't claim it, but we should give them something anyway, if we want them to have some security in the future. But this is being still abused by the political world, which is warming them up and putting them on the streets. Well, Paris is exceptional, but putting them on the street, claiming for the job model, which will not exist for sure. I don't know about robots, but I'm sure about the FTEs. It will be less and less present 100%. So the social turmoil and political responsibility to give responsible solutions to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we've had a great discussion in terms of a presentation in terms of the different elements of competitiveness and the challenges that remain. I think that clearly education, clearly the match between skills and jobs, regulatory issues, particularly in Europe, the scale of the market and whether that allows an innovative company to to scale up and become something that can survive in a global world. These are all issues that confront Europe and its competitiveness today. I want to open the floor to questions, and hope we'll see some good questions right down here in the front. Right.
Can we get some lights so that we can see hands?
So we can see you. We're kind of in the...
Yeah.
There they come. Okay, great. Congresswoman.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky from Chicago, a major Polish city, by the way. I think there was a voice missing in this panel, and that's the voice of workers. And I think the problem of wage stagnation, which certainly exists in the United States and many places in Europe as well, there's been winners and losers in these trade agreements, and generally people feel, not because politicians are telling them to feel that way, that they have been the losers. In the United States, we've seen wage stagnation for the last 30 years. Ordinary people have not seen their wages go up, and corporations and wealthy individuals have really been the beneficiaries almost 100%. I would say, Ambassador, that it's not about and others, that it's not about the election. And I understand the geopolitical reasons that may be given for trade agreements, TTIP, TPP. But if you look at the details here, I'm sure on both sides of the Atlantic, there are concerns, not about tariffs, it's about regulations and having to harmonize those. And so isn't there some concern about the sovereignty and things that would be lost in terms of hard-fought regulations that protect health and safety and wages and workers? And in addition, the predominant power of multinational corporations in the investor dispute resolutions that would benefit, not so much the countries even, or the businesses, the smaller businesses, but the major corporations that are able to go to private tribunals and panels to figure out who is the beneficiary. So, I just wanted to add some balance and see what you think about the legitimate concerns about workers, where they fit into this picture, and how the trade agreements need to be looked at in the details. The devil really is in the details.
Thank you for that, Congresswoman. And I wanted to ask, first off, Marietta can speak on TTIP. She said she's been doing a phenomenal amount of work on that. But I also, Maciej, if I was not mistaken, one of the things that you were warning about, actually, was that as the new generation goes in and is not that full-time equivalent work with benefits will not be so prevalent for them. Is that the case? Do you see more, as in the United States, we've had this wage stagnation. We've had more people who do not have jobs with full benefits. Is that something that you see happening here in Europe, too, over the long term? Because here it's been, I'd say, a bit more comfortable.
To make it very short, I will speak about Poland. So you have two phenomena. One, which is already raised by Prime Minister Bielecki, is effectively the wage stagnation, and which I would not qualify of positive, because this eventually helps short term, but it's not helping the development of the economy. It's increasing the social tensions. So this is something which we are facing today, and what is very surprising for me, living out of providing people to the companies, that we have now unemployment at the range of European measures 6.5%, and still the wages are not moving, other than per the state regulations, and it is an issue. But it's a bigger picture. But now on the full-time equivalent, there are professions where the young people, they are not even seeking for the full-time. I'm providing today IT engineers, contractors, and they are really not even asking for the full-time. For them, it's what is my per hour what will be our timing, and how long is the project, because I want to jump a new one to a new one. But it's eventually a typical world of the IT. But even in other areas, when I provide people, eventually specialized, not in the basic, the basic of the basic, the manutention, all this kind. Obviously, they would like to have some security, but the skilled people on the candidate market, they absolutely, I wouldn't say demanding necessarily automatically, but they are more than open to a kind of flex security, to use the very good and very nice expression. And I think this flex security is a great model which we should explore more, because this sounds well with the European culture.
So I think we have to be much more serious about the problem of youth unemployment. I think young people are adjusting their expectations because the reality is so grim. And so I think people don't want flex jobs, but if they think it's the only thing they can get, they're willing to get it. So I think we have to think much more about what the lack of structural reforms today mean for the generation of tomorrow, not only in the countries where it's going relatively well, but particularly in the countries like in Southern Europe where it's terrible. And then coming back to the question about workers and standards, I think it's important to know that there are differences not only within Europe that are huge. For example, minimum wage in Romania is about 250 euros a month, which, you know, it's a huge difference compared to, for example, Northwestern European countries. And there are huge differences between the problems in the US about social mobility, unequal distribution, social welfare system. But nevertheless, the questions that you raised are very legitimate. They come up to my inbox and in the meetings that I have with people all the time. And I think it's important to look at what trade can and cannot do. So removing trade barriers that are unnecessary can help stimulate growth. But the distribution of the growth is also a task for national governments to compensate where sectors are impacted and to make sure that there is a transition where it's necessary, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think it's a responsibility also in Europe that a lot of the national governments are not taking sufficiently in assessing where the impact might be felt, because sometimes what's good on a macro level is not good for specific individuals. And those people, of course, feel left out, and their concerns have to be heard. Now, on what you said about concerns about healthcare systems, environmental standards, labor rights, privacy, there are all kinds of questions about standards. And the negotiators in the US and the EU have committed a number of times that public services and these standards will not be lowered or touched by at least TTIP. So I can't speak for Trans-Pacific Partnership because that's a whole different ballgame, but the negotiations between the US and the EU. And from what I gathered in your question with regard to dispute resolution in investment cases, it sounds like you'd be welcoming the EU proposals because they go a very long way in reforming a system that indeed is lacking legitimacy in today's world and that has to be reformed. But that still lots of countries globally have implemented in existing bilateral agreements. So I think there is a serious question about the legitimacy of trade, but I also think there's a serious challenge that globalization brings, and that if we, the open economies, open democracies of this world, are not going to stand together and raise those standards and push for higher standards globally, then we may see countries like China or India that are very keen to see development without consideration for people and planet win sort of the race for standards and the race for market share if we don't act now for the next generation.
Let me bring in Lee Feinstein.
Well, Congresswoman, first of all, thank you so much for coming to Poland. You know it means a tremendous amount to Poland that there's a significant, as there is this year, representation of American men and women from our Congress. So it's just hugely important. And having been here and served, I know how hard we worked to persuade our friends from Congress. It's always difficult. There are lots of more important things to be doing at home. So we really, it's just extraordinarily important that you could be here. I think we're almost neighbors because I now live in Indiana, and this is kind of a battleground for exactly the kinds of concerns that you're raising. You know, the famous carrier video, the carrier plant video of the air conditioning plant, heating plant, which went viral in the United States and globally, I think is a perfect illustration of exactly the kinds of concerns you have. It's really unclear that the decisions that the leadership of that company made had to be made in that direction. But in any case, it's if you're a person who's dedicated their lives to this particular industry and worked faithfully and hard and felt a part of a community, when somebody makes an announcement the way that announcement was made, it's no surprise that people are highly dubious about the benefits of, in this case, NAFTA. And so I think it's a profound mistake not to acknowledge those concerns and not to try to address them. Now I'm in the world of public education, and I've been interested to see how big a part of this conversation it's been. You know, in the university, sometimes there are complaints about how pre-professional are the students, but the goal of public education in particular ought to be to give the students the same blessings that all of us, many of us in this room have had ourselves, which is to be able to make a living doing something that we care about. And so it's extraordinarily important that in addition to getting a broad education, first and foremost, it gives you the ability to think and analyze and read and write well, but also that the responsibility of the public institution is also to help you be able to make a living when you get out, because you've made a big investment one way or another, both of time and often of money to do so. And so public education is absolutely essential in that. I think what Maciej Witucki said about the role of education, vocational education, is also important, and also a route from community colleges into four-year colleges as well. This is also an extremely important route to success for our young people.
Mr. Bilecki, do you want to say anything? Yes.
Well, due to my past experience, I love to talk. So if you give me a small chance, then I will turn over the whole panel discussion and say that unfortunately, through a little bit theoretical discussions about economic modeling, we forgot about the present politics. And the present politics are, at least as I understand it, saying that there is no TTIP, there is no TPP. Both candidates are strongly against it. In Europe, the forces of populism are also quite strong. So maybe I'm exaggerating, but I think that some, at least, ideas moved by Donald Trump are becoming not extreme, but a kind of a new mainstream for plenty of politicians. And that means protectionism, not a free trade, is a new buzzword. Then assault on establishment is a new word, which also could change the wage level and everything. So we have a serious challenges to the existing economic model or liberal democracy model, and which could bring us to completely unknown, uncharted waters.
Mm-hmm. And finally, I want to bring in Anders Åslund.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question, Congresswoman. I would argue that the situation in Europe is very different. The wages have increased quite well in European countries, in real terms, that have been growing. I can take Sweden as an example, the Baltic countries as other examples. And the problem here is rather to get growth. So this is a big difference between the US and Europe in general. And also in terms of inequality, Thomas Piketty has made a big point, I think far too big point, of increasing inequality. I can't see it on the EU statistics for the last 2 decades. There is some increase in inequality, but it's a very different situation. And I think that you have 2 big factors in the US that I'm struck by. One is what Lee mentioned here, public education. public education is very poor on the poorer side. And in particular, what Maciej mentioned, vocational training. We are seeing in the Germanic countries that vocational training is excellent, and unemployment is as low as in the US, in spite of much lower income differentials. So I think that better training, vocational training in particular, is a vital part. And another issue is the excessive American healthcare costs. The US spends 17% of GDP on healthcare. Europe spends about half of it, and the health outcomes are much better. Average life expectancy in Europe is two years longer, and infant mortality virtually everywhere much lower. So these are elements. I don't get into the discussion of the big enterprises, which are, of course, much more powerful in the United States than here, but I would like to add these aspects. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks very much. I'm going to have to apologize to the others of you who had questions, because it's about time that we wrap up and go to the reception, and I wouldn't want to stand between you and the reception. I do want to, there will be people up at the top here who will guide you. There's no need to get on buses to get to the reception. It's at the far end of the Congress Hall, just outside and in the next building. I also want to encourage everyone to be here bright and early tomorrow morning. We will start promptly at 9 a.m. And the first session is U.S. foreign policy after the election, Europe and the world. And we're going to have not only Representative Schakowsky, who was just asking questions, but also Governor John Huntsman, and Senator Joe Manchin, the U.S. Senate. And so it should be a lively discussion about what has turned out to be a very lively election season and the aftermath in the United States. And I hope you all will join us for that, after, of course, you have been at the reception this evening. So let me thank our panel. They did a great job. It's a complicated set of issues, and I think they put a lot out on the table. Thanks very much.
Thank you.